Chapter 1. Lynn. Lynn. That voice, it's Brennan Hammond. But wait, wasn't I gone? We were driving to finalize our divorce when the accident happened. The last thing I remember before everything went black was Brennan throwing himself in front of me, shielding me. Facing the end for the first time is confusing, to say the least. I guess this is the part where my life flashes before my eyes, right? But why does it feel so real? I can feel his fingers tracing the corner of my lips, and then slowly brushing up to my ear, lingering there in a soft, almost tender caress. I hear him chuckle low in my ear, a sound filled with warmth and something else, happiness. Then his lips touch mine. They're soft, warm, and there's a faint smell of alcohol. When his chin grazes the tip of my nose, a shiver runs down my spine. Through half-lidded eyes, I catch a glimpse of his shadowy figure in the dim moonlight. But before I can make sense of it all, everything fades to black again. Chapter 2. The next morning, I wake up in Brennan's arms. I blink, and when my eyes focus on his face, my heart skips a beat. He looks young, like 20-something young. Wait, wasn't I supposed to be gone? Could this really be a dream? I need to know if this is real. Without thinking, I slap him hard, right across that handsome face. The sting in my palm is all the confirmation I need. This is no dream. Could it be that I've come back to life? The accident. We were both in it. So, if I've been given a second chance, what about him? Tentatively, I called out, "Brennan." His lashes flutter, just barely, and then he looks at me like I've lost my mind, his expression half amused, half bewildered. "What's wrong, honey?" That's not the Brennan I knew at 40, the one whose gaze had turned cold and distant. No, this is a much younger man. Looks like I'm the only one who's been sent back in time. I glance around the room. The decor is familiar, and nothing has changed. Our wedding photo still hangs above the bed, completely intact. My hand, still frozen midair from the slap, is suddenly caught in his. He leans into my palm, nuzzling against it, his stubble tickling my skin. A lazy grin spreads across his face. Oh no, did he enjoy that? "You're awake. Why not sleep a little longer?" His voice is soft, his gaze filled with a warmth I haven't seen in years. And then my eyes drift downward. His bare chest, the faint red marks, the little scratches. He notices where I'm looking and casually lets the blanket slide down, revealing his toned torso and, of course, those abs. "Come on. What do you think you're doing?" I squeak, covering my eyes with my hands, but not before leaving the tiniest gap between my fingers to sneak a look. Of course, my face betrays me, turning a deep shade of red. Even now, I can't help but admit Brennan still looks good. Really good. But then I remind myself we've been married for years. There's nothing on this man's body I haven't seen before. This traitor. He seduced me with that perfect face and body back when we were young, and I fell for it head over heels. But somewhere along the way, our marriage fell apart. I, the proud daughter of the prestigious Rakes family, wasn't about to let myself be humiliated. So I asked for a divorce. And on our way to the court to finalize it, we crashed. Now here I am, back in the past, back when we just gotten married. It's like the universe is playing some kind of twisted joke on me, sending me back to this awkward moment in time. If I had just come back a week earlier, I might have avoided marrying this handsome devil altogether. Chapter 3. I spent the whole day thinking, and I've finally come to terms with it. Brennan and I, we're never going to work. Better to end things now than to repeat my last life, where we grew into two miserable people trapped in a loveless marriage. If we're just going to end up bitter and resentful, we might as well cut our losses now and go find happiness elsewhere. But here's the tricky part, we're still newlyweds. I can't be the one to suggest divorce right out of the gate. No, I need to make him want to leave me. As always, Brennan brings over a few outfits, carefully picked out and laid across the bed, just like he used to. "Which one do you want to wear today, babe?" The way he says babe in that casual, affectionate tone, it's almost enough to make me forget what I'm trying to do here. I get the sudden urge to toy with him instead. "None of these. Go pick something else," I say, picking up my phone and scrolling through videos with a smug grin. Brennan dutifully goes back to the closet, bringing me outfit after outfit, but I reject every single one. I'm a little surprised, honestly. By the 10th outfit, he's still not mad. What's it going to take to push his buttons? Aren't I making this hard enough? Just when I'm thinking of new ways to irritate him, he pulls out one last dress, and I can't help but admit it, it's perfect. Still, I put on a pout and snapped. What took you so long? Brennan holds the dress up. How about this one? Do you like it? I narrow my eyes, pretending to be unimpressed. It's fine, I guess. He leans in to kiss my cheek, his lips brushing my skin briefly. I'll be downstairs making breakfast. Come down when you're ready. And just like that, I'm the one who's flustered. Was Brennan always this sweet? He almost seems innocent in a way I don't remember. With a sigh, I get dressed, taking my time. As I wander downstairs barefoot, I catch a glimpse of him in the kitchen. He's wearing a pink apron, flipping pancakes, completely at ease. The kitchen hasn't changed since we first moved in. Back then, we were hopelessly in love, always finding excuses to be together, even in the kitchen. I can still picture us laughing and making a mess as we cook side by side. But those days feel like a lifetime ago. Somewhere along the way, we became strangers, sharing quiet meals in fancy restaurants, barely speaking. Now, watching him cook again, my heart feels conflicted. Breakfast's ready, he calls. Then, as if reconsidering, he adds, actually, stay there. I'll come get you. He unties the apron and strides over to where I'm standing. When he reaches me, he flicks my forehead gently, making me wince. Ouch! I rub my forehead, feigning tears and putting on my best pout. In reality, it barely hurt. But Brennan leans in, concerned, and that's when I strike, flicking his forehead in return hard. Before I can even celebrate my little victory, he scoops me up without warning, throwing me over his shoulder like I weigh nothing. His arm tightens around my waist as he laughs. Well, Lynn. Look who's gotten bold. I let out a defeated sigh, resting my head against his back. How did this happen? I'm supposed to be the one with the upper hand here. I'm the one who's been through this before. So why do I always end up being the one he teases? Chapter 4. Thankfully, I'm too tired and hungry to keep up the teasing. At breakfast, I sit quietly, eating while Brennan occasionally feeds me bites of fruit, just like he used to when we were first married. Back then, life was simple, peaceful even. When did things change between us? When did our relationship start to fall apart? Babe, what are you thinking about? Brennan's voice pulls me from my thoughts. I look up startled, realizing he's holding out a piece of fruit. Without thinking, I open my mouth, but my teeth accidentally graze his fingertip. His expression shifts ever so slightly, darkening just a bit. He doesn't pull his hand away immediately. Instead, his fingers linger, brushing against my teeth for a split second longer than necessary before he finally withdraws. Babe, you really have an appetite, don't you? Annoyed, I grab his arm and bite down. Not too hard, but definitely enough to make a point. But instead of getting angry, Brennan just laughs softly and ruffles my hair. You little troublemaker. I take a breath and ask the question that's been gnawing at me. Brennan, do you think we'll ever get divorced? For a moment, he freezes, caught off guard. Then, with a sigh, he tightens his grip on my head, ruffling my hair even more. What? What's on your mind? You, I said instinctively. He pauses and then leans in, giving me a quick kiss on the lips. Same here. But he's avoiding the question. I can tell. And honestly, who could blame him? What kind of newlyweds talk about divorce right after getting married? As I watched him walk away, his back turned to me. I couldn't help but feel a little guilty. Am I being too hard on him? He's still so young, so full of hope. He has no idea what's coming. But at the same time, isn't it better to end things now before we both get hurt again? If nothing changes, what's the point of being reborn? Maybe, just maybe, Yvonne would be a better match for him after all. Chapter 5. Everything was playing out just like it had before. Once Brennan left for work, I went back to sleep for a bit. A few hours later, I woke up to my phone buzzing. It was my best friend calling. Lynn, just because you're married now doesn't mean you can forget about me. Her voice was teasing but insistent. Tonight, 8 p.m. our usual spot. Don't be late. Before I could get a word in edgewise, the line went silent. Classic her. I sighed, glancing at the clock. If I wanted to get Brennan to agree to a divorce, I needed to act soon. While he was still in his unusually agreeable mood, the sooner I got this over with, the better. I threw on a slinky dress, something that hugged my figure perfectly. As I stood in front of the mirror, I couldn't help but admire my reflection. It was like being in my 20s all over again. My skin was smooth and glowing, not a wrinkle in sight. No fine lines, no signs of age. I hadn't felt this fresh in years. By the time I arrived at the bar, it was just on the dot. As always, my friend was already surrounded by a couple of young, handsome guys, both of them clearly models or something close to it. But after spending so much time with Brennan, the handsome guy, these other guys just didn't compare. I took a seat, keeping a bit of distance from the action. Well, look who finally decided to show up, Mrs. Hammond herself, my friend teased, raising her glass in my direction. Ugh, cut it out, I muttered, rolling my eyes but raising my glass to clink hers anyway. Does Brennan even know you're out tonight? She asked, giving me a sly grin. I shook my head. I left him a message. Told him I wouldn't be home for dinner. Said I was going out with the girls. Honestly, I couldn't even remember what his reply had been. I hadn't bothered to check. After a few drinks, I started to feel buzzed when my phone rang again. I answered without even checking the caller ID, the alcohol making me impatient. Hello? Who is this? Your husband, came the flat reply. I blinked confused. Husband? I don't know what you're talking about. What husband? Lynn, stop messing around. Where are you? The voice was unmistakably familiar, but my alcohol-soaked brain couldn't quite place it. I'm out, obviously. I slurred, my annoyance growing. Having drinks with a bunch of hot guys. What are you going to do about it? The voice on the other end grew quieter, but I didn't care enough to listen. I hung up with a huff, tossing my phone back into my bag. Some weirdo pretending to be Brennan. I muttered under my breath. I'll have to tell him about it later. By the time Brennan actually showed up at the bar, I was properly drunk. I was practically leaning on one of the models, laughing at something I couldn't even remember. Without warning, I felt a strong arm pull me up, and I was enveloped in a familiar scent, cedarwood and something distinctly Brennan. He didn't say a word, but his grip tightened around me. I looked up, still giggling, clutching a half-empty bottle in my hand. Want a drink? I asked, offering him the bottle with a lazy grin. No thanks, he replied, his tone clipped. You've had enough. His assistant, Lee, nodded while Brennan remained expressionless. Even through my drunken haze, I could feel the tension rolling off him in waves. This was Brennan's angry silence, the kind that meant he was barely holding it together. But of course I was too far gone to care. I squinted at him, tilting my head. You know, you look just like Brennan. Isn't that weird? Can't seem to escape him even when I'm trying to have fun. I reached out, my fingers brushing his chin, but before I could grab him, Brennan scooped me up into his arms. I wrapped my arms around his neck, still laughing, feeling bold. They say alcohol gives you courage, right? If I had another hand free, I'd probably try to flirt with him. The car ride was suffocatingly quiet. The air felt thick and I tugged at my neckline, feeling overheated. A bit of skin peeked out, and Brennan noticed immediately, grabbing my hand to stop me from pulling any further. That's enough, he said, his voice low and firm. I rolled my eyes and huffed in frustration. Brennan, don't you hate me? I asked, my words slurred, but the question was genuine. When did I ever say I hated you? You don't hate me? I scoffed, my head spinning. Then why? Before I could finish, the nausea hit. I leaned forward, barely able to hold it back, and vomited right onto Brennan's shirt. And just like that, I sobered up, if only a little. Oh no, I was in so much trouble. Brennan was a clean freak. Everything he wore was perfectly pressed, and everything he owned was meticulously maintained. He wouldn't even let me eat snacks in his car, for God's sake. But then I remembered something. In my past life, I'd seen him take care of Yvonne when she'd gotten drunk. He'd wiped her mouth gently, not even caring that she'd ruined his clothes. I'd watched it all from a distance, wondering when things had changed so much between us. How had we gone from being so in love to barely tolerating each other? Why hadn't he just told me the truth back then? That he didn't love me anymore. I could have handled it. I didn't need his love. I had plenty of people who loved me. But even as I thought that, a dull ache settled in my chest. I pushed myself away from him, trying to put some space between us. You. Brennan sighed, reaching for his sleeve. To my surprise, he brought his sleeve to my face, gently wiping the corner of my mouth. I sat there stunned, too shocked to react as he carefully cleaned me up. Was I so drunk that I was hallucinating? Or was he the one who was drunk, mistaking me for Yvonne? Chapter 6. You little troublemaker, Brennan sighed, his voice low but teasing. Even in this life, you won't let me have any peace, will you? I stared at him, completely lost in my drunken haze. His words were just noise to me at this point, a soft murmur I couldn't quite make sense of. All I could think about was how close his lips were. I wanted to kiss him. I leaned in, but before I could get any closer, the nausea hit me again, even stronger this time. And just like that, I threw up, right onto his pants. That shut me up quickly. I shrank back into the seat, curling up like a scolded child, silent and still. The car was quiet after that. Nothing but the sound of Brennan's long, exasperated sigh filling the space. Eventually, we made it back to the house. I was barely conscious when he lifted me out of the car and carried me inside. Somewhere in the fog of my mind, I heard him talking to the butler. "Sir, should I prepare dinner for you and madam?" the butler asked, his voice respectful but curious. Dinner? Was Brennan planning to cook for me? That didn't sound like him. "No," Brennan said calmly. "Just make something to help her sober up. And your clothes, sir? If they're ruined, I'll buy new ones. It's not a big deal." I was drifting in and out of sleep, but I felt it when Brennan finally slipped into bed next to me later that night. His skin was cool from the shower, and I instinctively pressed myself against him. My hand brushed against his chest, and I couldn't help myself. I gave his firm muscles a playful squeeze. Brennan just chuckled softly and wrapped his arm around me, pulling me closer. He started gently patting my back. The motion was calming and soothing. And then, just as I was about to drift off again, I heard it, the soft, familiar humming of a tune he used to sing to me. The lullaby he'd always hum on nights I couldn't sleep. Chapter 7. The next morning when I woke up, Brennan was already gone. My head was pounding, and I spent half the morning trying to piece together what had happened the night before. Most of it was a blur, but one thing stood out clear as day. I'd thrown up on Brennan. I groaned, burying my face in my hands. I was in big trouble. But then I reminded myself, this wasn't exactly the same Brennan I'd known before. So what was I so worried about? The thought made me feel a little better, a little lighter. Later, the housekeeper came in with a gentle reminder. "Ma'am, Mr. Hammond's birthday is coming up soon." All right. His birthday. In my past life, his birthday had been a disaster. That was the night Yvonne had shown up. I'd seen the look in his eyes when he saw her, the way his whole face lit up. I'd known him long enough to recognize that spark of joy, even if it only lasted a second. We'd been childhood friends after all. I knew him better than almost anyone, which was exactly why I understood then. His heart wasn't with me. It never had been. This time, though, I wasn't going to wait around for history to repeat itself. I'd deliver Yvonne right to him. It would be my last act of goodwill before I walked away for good. After his birthday, I'd ask for a divorce. But I still needed to get him a gift. No matter what, I wasn't going to skip that part. I spent the entire afternoon at the mall, wandering from store to store, trying to find something that felt right. But no matter where I looked, nothing seemed good enough. Nothing seemed to fit. "Lynn," came a voice from behind me. I turned, surprised to see Michael Holland standing there. In my past life, Michael had been studying abroad. What was he doing back so soon? "I finished my courses early," he explained with a grin. "Graduated ahead of schedule." It was strange seeing him here, a reminder that my actions in this life were already creating ripples, changing things in ways I hadn't expected. He held out a sleek, elegant brooch. "What do you think of this?" I glanced at it. The design was simple but striking and perfectly suited to Brennan's style. "Thanks for the suggestion," I said, signaling to a sales associate to wrap it up. As they packaged the gift, I turned back to Michael, making small talk. In our previous lives, Michael hadn't been so lucky. His family's business had gone under thanks to Brennan. It had caused so many fights between us, fights we never really recovered from. The three of us had grown up together, inseparable as kids. But somewhere along the way, things had gone wrong. Whatever brotherhood Brennan and Michael once shared had turned to bitterness. And by the time we were adults, they were enemies. I'd always felt guilty about it, and I tried to help Michael's family, even going so far as to ask my parents to intervene. But it hadn't been enough. Michael, however, had fought his way back. He'd rebuilt his family's business on his own, but the effort had nearly cost him his health. By the time we reconnected, he was sick, his body breaking down from all the stress. I remember visiting him in the hospital, sitting by his bedside as he lay there, pale and worn out. By then, Brennan and I were barely speaking. He had Yvonne, and I spent my days at the hospital, watching Michael slip further away. One day, as I sat peeling an apple for him, Michael looked up at me, his voice barely a whisper. "Lynn," he'd said, "if I'd been braver, if I'd told you how I felt sooner, do you think you would have married me?" I'd paused, the knife still in my hand, the apple half peeled. I didn't answer him. Michael gave me a sad smile before closing his eyes, the heart monitor's steady beep fading into a flat line. His life ended in a single piercing moment. Chapter 8. And now, before I could finish speaking with Michael, Brennan suddenly appeared behind me. Without a word, he stepped forward and took my hand, intertwining our fingers in a show of possession. He made sure our wedding rings were on display as if that were some kind of statement. "Michael," Brennan said smoothly, his voice carrying an edge of dominance, "when did you get back? It's a shame you missed our wedding." He paused, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "But don't worry, I had some wedding favors set aside for you. Wouldn't want you to miss out just because you were late. We'll have them sent to your place later," he added in a casual tone as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Michael smiled politely, congratulating us, but his eyes lingered on me a little too long. I could feel Brennan's grip tighten, his fingers digging into my hand. He wasn't just holding on, he was staking his claim. I tried to pull away subtly, but Brennan's grip only grew stronger. The drive home was thick with tension, the air between us crackling. It felt so familiar, like every heated argument we'd had in the past. But this was different. Brennan shouldn't be threatened by Michael. Not now, not yet. And that's when the thought hit me like a bolt of lightning. Had Brennan been reborn too? His next words sent a chill down my spine. "Lynn, what is it about Michael?" His voice was low, almost accusing. I blinked in confusion, caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, backing me up until I was pressed against the arm of the sofa, nowhere to escape. His face hovered dangerously close to mine, his eyes searching for something, anything, in my expression. "You were always looking at him," he murmured, his voice tight. "When we were kids, when we grew up. Even now. And what about later? Do you plan to keep ignoring me for the rest of our lives?" A familiar feeling washed over me, making me certain that Brennan had been reborn. "And what about you and Yvonne?" I shot back, my voice sharper than I intended. "Don't act like you weren't in love with her. What was I to you, Brennan? Just convenient." The words tumbled out in a rush, years of pent-up frustration and hurt finally boiling over. "You always told me what I couldn't do, but with her you bent over backward to make exceptions. I'm your wife. If you're sick of me, if you don't want me anymore, just say it. Stop hurting me like this." My voice wavered, and I could feel the sting of tears in my eyes. I hated that I was crying, hated that I was letting all this old pain resurface. But I couldn't stop. Brennan's face changed. Panic flickered in his eyes. He looked as though I'd just knocked the wind out of him. "No, Lynn, you've got it all wrong," he said, his voice suddenly desperate. "It was always you. From the beginning, it's always been you. Why do you think I fought so hard to marry you?" I stared at him, my mind racing. "If that's true, why did you divorce me?" He looked away, swallowing hard. "That day, I wasn't taking you to the courthouse. I was taking you to the river, where we had our first date." I froze, caught off guard. The river? I thought back for a moment, remembering the route we'd taken that day. The courthouse and the river were close, on the same road. "And Yvonne?" I pressed, disbelief still lingering. "How do you explain her?" Brennan let out a long breath, running a hand through his hair. "Yvonne is my sister." I blinked, completely thrown. "What?" He nodded. "She took our mother's last name. I took our father's. She's my blood sister, Lynn. I swear. Why didn't you ever tell me?" His eyes softened, guilt creeping into his expression. "I should have told you. I wanted to, But every time I saw you with Michael, I got jealous. I knew he liked you and it made me crazy. I wanted to make you jealous too, so I used Yvonne to get under your skin. I know it was stupid. His voice dropped to a whisper as his confession unraveled. I wanted you to care. And I wanted you to comfort me. For a moment, I could only stare at him, speechless. Of all the childish, ridiculous things he could have said, this was the last thing I expected. Well, congratulations, Brennan. You sure succeeded in pissing me off. Without warning, he closed the distance between us, pressing his body against mine, his breath warm on my neck. I could feel the heat radiating off him, his presence overwhelming. Sir, about dinner. The butler's voice broke through the moment, but he quickly realized his mistake and retreated, leaving us alone. As he left, I heard him murmur softly, I'll let the cleaning staff know they're not needed this afternoon. I couldn't help it. Laughter bubbled up, spilling out of me. This whole situation was so absurd. Brennan leaned closer, his lips brushing against my ear. Lynn, can we hear? His voice was low and gravelly, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. His kisses were making my head spin, and my hands instinctively gripped his shoulders for balance. His fingers moved along my body slowly, with practiced ease, tugging at my clothes, peeling them away one layer at a time. Do you want to stay here? He asked, his voice teasing. Or should we take this to the bedroom? I pinched him hard on the side, making him yelp. The bedroom, I muttered. As he carried me, he couldn't resist one last teasing question. Lynn, be honest. Who's better in bed? Me at 40 or me in my 20s? I blinked, not sure if I'd heard him right. What was he talking about? Was he jealous of himself? When I didn't respond immediately, he pushed harder, making me gasp. Both. You're great at both. I blurted out, half laughing, half groaning. It felt like hours before he finally let me go. I was exhausted, barely able to keep my eyes open, but Brennan wasn't done. He stayed close, his arms still wrapped tightly around me, whispering my name over and over. Lynn. Lynn. I groaned, too tired to deal with his clinginess. Finally, I reached up and pressed my fingers to his lips. Sure, I whispered. Chapter 9. Brennan's birthday was a grand affair, with the families of the Pei, Lu, and Xia all in attendance. I looked at my dress with satisfaction. It was even more magnificent than the one I wore back then. I've been saving this dress for you for a long time, Brennan said. How does it compare to the one from our previous life? I teased. It looks beautiful on you no matter what, he replied. Someone once said it had a unique charm, I joked. Brennan indulgently tapped my nose. He took out a sapphire necklace from a nearby box. This necklace belonged to a foreign royal family. I know what you're going to say, but my Lynn deserves the best in the world. Brennan stood behind me and fastened the necklace around my neck. The sapphire pendant rested quietly on my collarbone, perfectly complementing my white mermaid dress. Arm in arm, we made our entrance under the watchful eyes of the guests. Brother. Sister-in-law. Yvonne fluttered over like a lively butterfly. Compared to her sickly appearance in the previous life, she now looked healthy and vibrant. The young girl with her sweet words clung to me, calling me sister-in-law, quickly winning my heart. The elders of the three families gathered together, now shifting their focus to Michael. You three grew up together. Lynn and Brennan are a couple now. Michael, is there a girl you fancy? Yes, tell us and we'll help you out. Exactly, your parents might not be keen, but we are all family here. Surrounded by relatives, Michael looked overwhelmed, his head practically spinning. Brennan couldn't help but chuckle beside me. It was clear to me that this was his doing. He's over 40 and still bullying someone in their 20s. Brennan, you are indeed ruthless. After finally escaping the relatives, Michael walked straight towards us. Brennan, like a guard, pulled me into his embrace, his eyes subtly flashing with pride and defiance. I'm sorry I missed your wedding, Brennan. Lynn. Last time I saw Lynn, I picked out a birthday gift for you, Brennan. Michael smiled warmly and motioned for me to bring out the gift. I remembered and had someone bring it to Brennan. Brennan, take a look. Do you like it? The sapphire brooch gleamed under the lights. Brennan maintained a pleasant smile, but I noticed the vein throbbing on his temple. This was Brennan's telltale sign of hidden anger. Feeling mischievous, I decided to tease him. I spent ages at the mall that day, and thankfully I ran into Michael. Brennan glanced down at me. After being married for 2 lifetimes, I knew that look meant I was in for it later. I couldn't help but feel a shiver down my spine. Brennan crouched slightly, signaling for me to pin the brooch on him. People around us watched intently. As I fastened the brooch, I suddenly froze. I hadn't scrutinized this brooch before. In the previous life, I didn't notice that Michael had given it to me as a birthday gift. By then, Brennan and I were at our lowest point. Our second-to-last major argument before our divorce was over this brooch. Now here it was, appearing early as Brennan's birthday gift. I glanced at Michael with a questioning look. He smiled gently, showing no signs of anything unusual. What was out of place? Lost in thought, I pricked my finger on the brooch. Hiss! Brennan, like a protector, grabbed my hand and sucked on the wound. Are you okay? The warmth and tingling sensation made me pull my hand back. The elders are watching. So what? Look how kindly they're smiling. Who could imagine that these prominent figures in business and politics look just like ordinary relatives now? Congratulations to the in-laws. Looks like we'll have a grandchild by next year. Hey, let's agree. Our Pei family gets the baby on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and the Liu family on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Let's first hand over some company shares to show our goodwill. Brennan and I exchanged a silent look, both thinking the same thing. Please just give us a break. Chapter 10. Brennan, worried I might get bored, invited Yvonne to stay with us for a while. As I got to know her better, I discovered she was quite the mischievous little girl. Brennan confided in me privately. Don't be fooled by Yvonne's small size. If not for her health issues, she could cause even more trouble. This included, but was not limited to, shaving Grandpa Pei's head bald when she was a child, making younger family members cry on a schedule, exactly 20 times a month, pranking people by drawing turtles in their books. The unlucky victim was Michael. I stood there, stunned, unable to imagine such accomplishments from a dainty girl. She was as mischievous as I was in my childhood. No wonder we got along so well. Yet, I felt a surge of frustration. Why hadn't Brennan told me about this in our previous life? Then again, back then, neither of us wanted to be home. We barely saw each other a few times a month. It was lonely, very lonely. Sister-in-law, your phone is ringing. I snapped out of my thoughts and answered. It was Michael calling. The Michael family hadn't gone bankrupt yet. Hopefully, this time, he and Brennan wouldn't fight to the bitter end. Michael invited me to meet at our old school. He was planning to build a Hope Elementary School and wanted to inspect the site. I was excited at the prospect. Anything to escape the boredom of staying home all day. As Brennan's wife, I could also help his company indirectly, which was a win-win. Do you remember when we were kids, you always played with me? Because Brennan was always so stern. You would cry whenever you saw him. I recalled his words, it seemed true. As a child, I found Michael more approachable than Brennan and always played with him. Brennan followed us around like a nanny. Many years and 2 lifetimes later, I still ended up marrying Brennan. The sunset stretched our shadows long on the ground. The school broadcast played familiar saxophone music. Lynn, will you divorce Brennan? Before the misunderstanding was cleared up, I had thought about divorcing him. But once it was resolved, I realized we did love each other. I shook my head. No, he is the one I've chosen to love. No matter what, I won't leave him. Michael looked despondent, probably because he hadn't found someone he liked. I patted his shoulder sympathetically. It's okay. Aren't your parents planning to hand over the family business to you? We'll keep an eye out for you. A hurt expression flashed in his eyes as he stepped closer. The distance between us became ever so slightly intimate. He reached out to remove a leaf from my hair, smiling gently. Then I'll be counting on you and Brennan. At that moment, Michael looked like a delicate, helpless flower. This vulnerable look reminded me of him before he passed away, pale and pleading. Could he have been reborn too? I quickly dismissed the thought. After all these years of friendship, I knew Michael well enough. Chapter 11. When I got home from the school, I found the house empty. By now, Brennan should have been home from work, and Yvonne should have been around too. My phone had been unusually quiet all day, with no calls from Brennan. I heard a noise coming from the upstairs study. Could there be a burglar in the house? I went to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and slowly approached the study. The room was dark, and I could barely make out a silhouette. The figure's pajamas were half open, revealing glimpses of abs and a well-toned waist. Cautiously, I called out, "Brennan!" The person inside didn't respond, only low, deep moans filled the room. My face flushed with embarrassment. I'll leave you to it then," I said, turning to close the door behind me. But he grabbed my wrist and pulled me inside. Oops, I dropped the knife. I was pinned against the cold door, my hands restrained. A dominant, demanding kiss followed. I whimpered, using a bit of force to free my hands. Now it was my turn to take control with him beneath me. I bit down on his neck. A heavy breath escaped him, piquing my interest. "Brennan." His wrist turned red under my grip. In the darkness, his gaze was dangerous yet alluring, like a snake waiting to strike. He stared intently at his prey. In the midst of our silent battle, I lost my strength. He regained the upper hand. "Lynn, I'm not happy. Why did you see Michael again?" "Next time. I'll let you know in advance." His movements became more forceful. "Husband." He softened his pace slightly. "Look at me too, okay?" Just when I thought we were taking a break, he pressed close against me again. It felt like being entwined by a giant python, relentless and unforgiving. "Brennan, you sure are ruthless." Chapter 12. When I brought lunch to Brennan at his office, I ran into Michael in the elevator. "Lynn, fancy meeting you here." He greeted me with his usual gentle demeanor. I replied, keeping a cautious distance from him. That weekend, Brennan had been quite relentless. He kept asking me whether I found him or Michael more attractive and if I wanted a divorce. I was a bit irritated and ended up biting his shoulder. Despite everything, he still didn't fully trust me and had someone keeping tabs on my every move. Deep down, he was still an insecure person. I reassured him and promised, "We will always be together." I was worried that if Brennan saw me with Michael again, he might explode. Brennan's assistant, Lee, greeted me with a smile and ushered me in. "Madam, please wait a moment. Mr. Pei needs to discuss something with Mr. Xia first." "I'll just go in then." I nodded. Through the glass, Brennan's tall figure exuded an aura of authority. I wondered if in this life, he and Michael would end up clashing over interests. I couldn't see Brennan's expression, but Michael's face was clear to me. He looked like a perfect little seducer. I had to admit, I could almost ship the two of them. Finally, Michael came out. "What's wrong? Did Brennan say something to you?" His eyes were slightly watery as he turned away, not wanting me to see his expression. "I'm fine, don't worry." I asked Lee to escort Michael to the elevator while I went to calm Brennan down. "What did you say to Michael? Why is he crying?" "Crying? Then he needs more practice," Brennan said, frowning. I placed the lunch on his desk. "Are you planning to leave the Michael family alone in this life?" Brennan paused while opening the lunchbox. "Yes. Because you don't like it." I still didn't fully understand why Brennan had turned against the Michael family so fiercely in our previous life, even driving Michael to the brink of despair. I propped my head on my hand and ruffled his hair. "Good boy. Remember to keep your distance from Michael. You promised me." "Okay." Chapter 13. In this lifetime, everything seems to be moving in a positive direction. The Michael family handed over control to Michael early on, and they never embarked on a path of crime. Brennan didn't pursue any drastic measures against them. Instead, he began collaborating with Michael's company. The charitable endeavors I invested in also started to flourish. Brennan's company's value continued to rise. However, he still kept a wary eye on Michael, as if he might steal from us. That was until our daughter was born. For some reason, our daughter took a special liking to Michael, much to the annoyance of Brennan, who was a doting father. Objectively speaking, in this scenario, Michael had managed to outshine Brennan in a different way. "Michael, first you couldn't have my wife, and now you're trying to take my daughter. I'm warning you, don't even think about it." Yvonne, to avenge her brother, continued to draw turtles on Michael's paperwork. However, this time it was on company contracts. Now it was Michael's turn to be angry. But getting angry didn't help. Whenever he raised his voice, Yvonne would clutch her chest and feign pain. It was a case of the trickster meeting the tricked. Brennan described it as a battle between a tea master and a sickly child. Brennan, eager for our son to take over the family business someday, sometimes brought him to meetings. The only difference now was that he yelled less. What once felt like an empty villa gradually filled with life after the arrival of our 2 children. What used to be a cold house was now a warm, joyful home for the 4 of us. It was wonderful to spend another lifetime as Brennan's wife. Chapter 14. Children's Epilogue. For the 7th time this month, I saw Dad standing at the bedroom door, begging Mom to let him in. Go sleep in the study. I don't want to see you. Wife, I was wrong, okay? A humble dad, an irritable mom, and a clueless little brother. My brother tugged at my sleeve, his baby voice piping up. Sis, I want some honey water. Fine, even a cured brother would still drool. Sis, do you think Mom and Dad will get divorced? I calmly handed him the honey water. No. Although Mom always kicks Dad to the study when she's angry, and even threatens divorce when it's serious, they've never actually divorced. It's just a game of willing participants. After all, Dad seems to enjoy it too. Give them another lifetime and another and another. They'll always end up together. Sigh, when will I find my own true love like Uncle Michael? Sis, the water is too hot. Chapter 15. Brennan's Epilogue. When Lynn's slap landed on my face, I was instantly awakened. I was back, and in front of me was the Lynn who had just married me. Compared to our previous life, where we had grown to resent each other, this was a fresh start. Fortunately, I had returned in time, before any misunderstandings had taken root. Everything was still salvageable. When my little girl called me Brennan, with those familiar eyes, I knew she had come back too. I felt a mischievous urge to tease her and give her a slight punishment. But, as always, I ended up losing to her. I did everything she asked of me, but then she went behind my back and hired male models. Was I not trying hard enough? Or did my physique fall short compared to theirs? Unacceptable. Seeing her curl up against me in distress, my anger dissipated. Between us, there were still Yvonne and Michael. Yvonne's issue was my fault. I wanted to provoke Lynn. She always fought with me about Michael. Now, all misunderstandings were cleared. She and Yvonne got along well. Yvonne even said she really liked her as a sister-in-law. I knew what the thorn in her heart was. I didn't let her eat in the car because she got carsick and would vomit. She had forgotten this. The medicine in the car was for Yvonne, who I was picking up from the hospital. I wanted her to have something to eat in the car. Yet she kept pleading for Michael, which infuriated me. Michael's death saddened me too. After all, we had been good friends once. When he came back early and met Lynn, I suspected he might have been reborn too. Thankfully, the misunderstanding between Lynn and me was resolved, otherwise, he might have stolen her from me again. The day in the office was my final warning to him. You made a mistake, so own up to it. She loves me, and you need to back off. Then he turned around and played the victim in front of Lynn, acting like a perfect little seducer. I was so annoyed that I secretly added more tasks to his workload. Until our children were born. Every time I saw our daughter cling to him, I ground my molars in frustration, holding our son in my arms, who then said, Dad, I want some honey water. Never mind, the company will go to our daughter in the future. Every night, seeing these 2 little ones and my wife lying together, my heart softened. Happy again, Brennan. Not just in this life, but in the next and the one after that. I will always be with Lynn, never to be separated.